So what are the stakes? Why are you doing what you're doing? And why is that important? Where would you like to move also? We have seen a range of possibilities.
Why am I doing what I'm doing? Or why is it? Oh, I think I've got...
Oh, is yours working? Okay.
I think I do what I do because if I don't do it, then I'm miserable. So it's I don't know, probably a scientist would tell me it's not biological, but it's just a kind of innate sensation. Hussein, you talked about kind of a musician and expressing the sense of the world's vibration in a way, and I think that the creative process for me, in my experience, I don't really have an idea of what it's going to be like in the end. And it's more just like steering the intuitive path towards something which is very uncertain, but there's something that's pushing you towards that.
Christina?
So I guess, I got into biology because I was like, this is awesome. The idea that biology grows and is inside of us doing all these amazing things at all of these different scales and all these different levels, and it's all connected in these beautiful ways. Like biology is really inspires me every day. Why I do what I do with artists and being on panels like this is because I was really tired of hearing other people talking about what the future was going to be, and it didn't fit. It didn't sound like, it didn't match what I thought or what I was feeling or what I was seeing about what was special or interesting about biology or what felt real to me. And so, yeah, basically I was tired of all the jerks having their way, so I wanted to be able to imagine something too and be part of that.
Natasha, I think.
Yeah, so I think that in my work as an anthropologist, both the project that I presented to you about today and my prior work, which was about slot machine addiction, actually, which seems quite different, but is another sort of human machine. I mean, in a sense, the slot machine is sort of like a wearable technology, right? And it is another sort of mediation of experience and modulation of affect and being in the world. And it's one in which the goal of the gambler and the casino is to exit the world and go into what gamblers call this sort of machine zone where time, space, and even a sense of self falls away. And I was fascinated by this next project on tracking technology because it seemed to me similar but different. So there's a similar kind of anxiety about being a self in the world and nervousness and need for modulation, but there's a desire to stay in the game, so to speak, in time, space, and the world, but a desire to have help doing that. And agency is in trouble in a similar way in both projects. And that's really the theme that in my work drives me, that I think is so important across the board, is this idea of individual agency that we see as a problem that we don't have it, but then sometimes it's a problem when we do have it. And I feel like we're caught often in public and academic conversations. You mentioned Big Brother. I talked today about Little Mother. And on both sides, you can kind of critique, who's taking away our agency, how do we protect our agency? And we fall into these conversations about empowerment and privacy versus the Big Brother and the sort of constraints and surveillance. And I'm trying to kind of get beyond that and show that, the whole idea of agency and privacy is founded on certain kind of capitalist notions of property, and you can excavate these things and take them back to the very problems that are creating the troubles we have in the first place. So I want to put that aside. People always think this tracking stuff and wearable technology, they want to go right to privacy and control and empowerment and autonomy. And I want to say, hold on, that's a great conversation. Lots of people are having it. Let's talk about our own relationships to our bodies and to the world and to each other that maybe will illuminate other ways in which we are human and not human, as Layla put it in the opening comments.
Hussein, now that we are with agency, one of my favorite topics. Hussein, we talked a lot about politics yesterday, and your work is political in so many ways, but still, how do you manage to be not reduced to politics? How do you engage the political comment and critique it, but yet, your work is also so poetic and multi-layered. I wonder, what are the kind of challenges that you face in your field around these issues?
Well, one of the reasons why I think I became a designer was because I wanted to understand the world, I guess, and my work should become maybe a catalyst for understanding. And then, and I'm going to come back to your question. Mm-hmm. And then I think it was looking at the body as my tool, because I felt that everything we do in the world is an amplification of the body and the way the body is made. If you look at the systems we create, if you look at the buildings we build, vehicles we build, programming even, I think there is somehow this idea of how we are made ourselves kind of innately and instinctively amplified in everything we do. So there was that realization for me. And then the third point is communication and the satisfaction of communication. Mm. I think that when we communicate and it's reciprocal, I guess it's the ultimate feeling of good, let's say. And then all these other things infiltrate. Like, I think politics, are, you think of them differently depending on where you're from, what you've experienced. I'm from part of the world where different cultures collide. I'm from a very mixed background. And I guess then people's view of me with the name Hussein would be different because of, what they might think. But actually, I didn't even think of my name as Hussein until 9/11. I never thought of it. I never thought that I came from a Muslim background or anything, came from a very secular background. So then you get reduced to what people, how they perceive you. Yeah. But so it's to do with actually, I guess, people's like cliche understanding of what one should think or be. But I always felt for me that I was like a detached observer of behavior. Mm-hmm. So I am looking at politics in a sort of detached manner, but at the same time, because I'm from a certain background, it filters through inevitably. So it's this sort of space in between, I would say.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned at several occasions that you work with this idea of being an immigrant in different disciplines, and I would say you're more like a Renaissance man, and we have also a couple of Renaissance women here with all the different talents and crossing over the disciplines and collaborating with a number of people. What does this intersection of art, science, culture, and technology, how does that work for all of you, let's say? How do you harvest that energy between these fields, and
for me,
what makes
freedom.
It so interesting?
For me, I have described myself as an immigrant between different disciplines, and it gives me freedom. And I think a multilateral way of thinking that I find more enriching. So yes, it's freedom for me personally, and also being able to engage with all different kinds of worlds and ways of thinking. Because then I think if you do think in a cross-disciplinary or a cross-cultural way, I feel that the work gets more exciting and more stimulating, personally.
Renaissance women?
I agree. I think that this idea of freedom and being able to see beyond yourself, I think certainly for me when I was a student and very, very narrowly focused in the molecular scale and thinking about a particular piece of a particular enzyme all day long, and like for the purpose of saving the world by making biofuels, I certainly was couldn't see the forest for the trees, and being able to think in an interdisciplinary way, and talk to people who are asking questions about similar topics and engaging with this idea of where are the problems, how do we solve problems with technology and design, how do we understand the intersections of politics and culture within science and technology. That helped me get outside of that and start to see how all these things were connected, how technology was really happening.
Mm-hmm. If you have questions to each other, I would encourage you. Otherwise, I'm reading here. The audience has some really crunchy questions, if you would like to hear them. So I'll throw a couple of them in the pool. So why is the white female idealized body seemingly the only representation presented here? This has 10 likes. 8 likes. Hussein, how has Central St. Martin shaped your career, and do you believe you would be where you are without that exposure?
It's a really important question, actually, because I went to Central St. Martin's, which was an art school where fashion happened to be a department in it. So that meant that already talking about this kind of cross-disciplinary way of living and learning, I was engaging with people from sculpture, from fine art, from photography, and I didn't really go to a fashion school. So this is a really important point. And yes, my work wouldn't be what it wouldn't be this if I hadn't gone to St. Martin's, but definitely, I think also being in a very multicultural environment, everybody was from somewhere else. I think that's a very important way to grow. And I was so happy yesterday that at MIT, it felt very multinational and multicultural. And I think to expose yourself to things that are very different to you is very important and very, I think that's how you grow, and not to hang out with people that are like you.
Mm-hmm.
Which is relevant to the first question.
Which
is a good observation.
There's a second also related to that. Maybe we can connect them together. How has thinking about the feminine or about the female body in particular been especially generative for imaging a different, viable, a better future? And then we have the idealized female body, the only representation here.
So I think, that's a good, it's connected, right? I think why is imagining the female and feminine important for thinking about a different or better future? I think that's because so much of the science fiction imagining of the future is for men and has male characters, or the spaceships were designed at first, like Apollo, whatever, they didn't make them for women. It was impossible technologically to make them to fit women, right? And so so even just imagining a woman in space made NASA go crazy, and is really interesting about thinking about all the variation in bodies in general, and is important for thinking about the future. I think how it ties to the representation of race in the images, I think it's a good question, and I would think that's something that should challenge all of us, to think about how we're thinking and doing and making these images, because I think who we see and how we see ourselves as part of these futures and images is how we make the future.
Mm-hmm. There's one more crunch, maybe for Lucy and Natasha to help answer. Natasha helped us to see technologies as ethical modulators. The flashy, visceral technologies Lucy and Christina envisioning, also Foucauldian technologies.
So if I could just interpret a little,
go ahead.
There is, Foucault's work on care of the self, his later work going back to Greece and looking at the Stoics and other groups who really cared about living a flourishing life and tracked themselves in many ways. So, this theme of self-care and living a good life is what I think that question is asking about, and how you guys would see that in your vision of technology.
I didn't show some behind-the-scenes images, but generally I start experimenting on my body. So I've been known to wrap myself in membranes with a vacuum cleaner and potentially can suffocate myself. So it always starts with my body and then works out from there. And if I'm making a film in terms of self-care, which is maybe going off the track, but if I'm making a film, then I'm maybe doing some kind of crazy Mai Tai at the same time to balance out the making process. So I think, the state of mind when we are giving birth to these ideas of science and technology is really important, and it goes back to, being vulnerable and the mindset of taking a risk and not really knowing. I don't know if I've answered that question.
Well, I'll also just draw out one aspect. I was taken by this kind of epistolary, Australia, Cambridge exchange that you had, and a critical part of self-care for Foucault and for the Greeks and many other groups was the social exchange, and that self-care had to do with being a good citizen in a polis. And often when you took track of yourself at the end of a day, that wasn't enough. You had to share it with another citizen to hold yourself accountable. So I think that the two of you in your very process were not in this sort of isolation institute. You were communicating.
This is really fun. Olivia Butler is sending regards. Okay, so one last question maybe to Hussein. Hussein, your driving creative force is narrative rather than a technology specifically. Why do you think you have why your work gravitates towards technology as material so often?
Why do I? Because I think that the only things you can do in this world right now that is new is via technology, because in my field, everything has been done already. Fashion is a self-perpetuating cycle. And I genuinely believe that the only thing that can be done that's new is via technology. But I use technology as a tool. I don't do it for the sake of it. And
you use it as a narrative also, device.
Yes, and also just generally ideas that have been kind of coming up is enhancement, and like improve human experience, improve confidence, empower the body, all these things. I guess, I gravitate towards these things naturally. And I think that should be the role of technology, is to, I guess, improve our lives.
Well, on that note, on that happy, inspiring note, I would like to thank all of you and thank CAST for convening this fantastic conference.
Well, let me thank all of you, and may I say that we're going to take a few minutes to reset the stage, so please feel free to stretch, but don't go too far, because we're going to have a wonderful performance by Maya Beiser to close out today. And then they'll be followed by a reception downstairs. So take a few minutes, Mill, but please don't leave. We'll be ready in a few minutes.